Chapter 3 Rise of the Crew. Looking at Sibby and his friends on the monitor, lounging in the rec room they had made for themselves in the old abandoned factory, I was filled with nostalgia for the days gone by when our crew had the world at our fingertips. Although Sibby and his friends were nowhere near our caliber, that was not because of a lack of skill. I think that it was because of the circumstances of their lives, that they had not yet realized their potential. They just had a lot of unanswered questions that were occupying their thoughts. It was just as Sosh had predicted. If we gave the boys a few brain teasers to work with, they would not be too difficult to handle. What I mean by that is, we did it on purpose, giving the boys a mysterious number and cryptic remarks. It was to keep their minds focused on the abstract, so they would not do anything that would land them in trouble, like how we had landed face first ourselves when we were their age. I must admit, it did not seem that we would get into trouble way back then. But looking at it now, I see that if we had only made a few tweaks to our method of operations, we would have had a lot more success, and we would also still have our team leader with us. It was still a mystery to us how the FBI had gotten onto our tails. With the amount of backup that Pete had from his contacts in Russia and China, it was mind-boggling how they knew where to catch him. It still stank of an inside leak, and now it was impossible for us to trust any of our contacts. Neither the Russians nor the Chinese had an answer for us, and this just made all us more suspicious of each other. But as the situation stood at the time, we all needed each other, so we worked together. We, the core team that Pete had assembled in college, were all just working at the moment to keep Pete safe in prison, and to keep his son out of harm's way as well. The Russians were still assisting us, because they had already invested a lot of work into keeping and training the team. This was because they needed our expertise for something that they were brewing up to carry out in the U.S. They needed the rest of Pete's team to assist them with a new political project. Looking at Sibby and his friends, I was reminded of the time how we all hung out in college. We were young and thought that we had the world at our feet. We were all at the college on partial scholarships, and we were the creme de la creme, and we knew that. It was this knowledge that made us cocky and confident that we'd be able to achieve anything we wanted in life. Since we were good with computers and technology, we constantly kept challenging ourselves with tougher and more robust scenarios. Hacking is the toughest thing there is, because there are two things you need to accomplish within the task that is termed hacking. First, you need to achieve your objective, and the second thing, what is the most important, you need to do it unobserved. You cannot leave a digital trail of breadcrumbs and call it good. This is the aspect of hacking that makes it more difficult. With each revolution of technological invention, it got harder and harder, especially with Advanced Security Information Event Management, SIEM, tools companies are using now. However, for us, it was all fun and games, until all the consequences of our actions caught up with us. We were just too caught up in our own fame and expertise to give much thought to the consequences of our actions. We did not realize that there would come a time that we would have to give an account of how we utilized our skills. We did not want Sibby and his friends to come to the same crossroads that we did in our lives because of our actions. That was when we decided that we were going to monitor Sibby and the rest of his friends very closely and make sure that they would not follow the same path that we did. This way, they were sure to end up in a situation that would mean the end of their lives. That was also something that we could not allow to happen. Anything that would endanger Sibby's life would have to slip through the nets that we had spread around him. For all of us owed his dad, Pete, our lives. He was the leader of our team, and he made sure that we were all taken care of. He even sacrificed his only chance to have a life with his son. That possibility was over as well. For even if we managed to somehow find Pete and get him out, there were 16 years that the father and son had missed together. This was a thought that bothered me a lot and kept me glued to the screens. The screens had been my brainchild. I had written a nifty little program that used the same fundamentals as that of a facial recognition software used by the Fed. But this one would comb out every available source of footage on any available network. It could tap into the national network grid, as well as personal cameras and private security cameras alike. It had just one objective, to keep track of Sibby and his friends and make a timeline of all their whereabouts. The places where there were no public or security cameras available that Sibby and his friends frequented, well, we had taken the liberty to put in our own. Like the one on the corner window of Sibby's rec room, there was a weird sort of ritual that we had all fallen into. Once a day, all the team members would remotely check the feed from different locations. Also, that's another pointer that we weren't in the same location anymore. We settled in Georgia and New York, and were now married with children. And we had promised our wives that we would never involve ourselves in anything Pete related, because the consequences of getting caught for any cyber-related crime were hefty. So Sibby monitoring was a secret among the original members, and checking on Sibby to see how he was doing was a risk we had to manage. If, for some reason, I had to go away for some time, I knew that someone else from the team would pick up the slack and keep an eye on him. And that was another reason why we used the voice changer. We did not want Sibby to figure out how many of us there were. Once, Sibby called the number that we had given him when I was not around. In fact, the entire team had the opportunity to speak with him at one time or another. Sibby, as I said, was a clever child. There was a lot that he had put together, and even though it looked like wild conjecture on his part, he was really close with his thinking that we were comfortable with. For example, since we had to tell him that we knew his dad, and had given Sibby an example of how he could hack any ATM he gave us the number to within minutes, well, he had concluded that his dad was a programmer and a hacker, and that if he was alive, he was in prison. I mean, his detective skills weren't like those of Hercule Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, but still impressive. When we were his age, all we were concerned with was how to get into good parties, and that is how the whole fiasco of our lives had started. We were good at hacking, and would mostly content ourselves to meddling with the school's Wi-Fi and writing code that would automate most of the process of writing and submitting homework assignments for us. However, one day Pete found out that the football team was in need of our help. Namely, Russell Winters, who was the quarterback on the team, required assistance. He was about to flunk almost all his classes, and if he failed any of them, he was sure to be disqualified from the team. Those are the rules. If you were on any of the school's sports teams, you had to have at least an overall B- in all your subjects, and our quarterback was about to flunk all his subjects. So Pete decided that he would give him a boost, as Pete had just recently discovered a completely untraceable method of getting into the school system and making any changes that he wanted. It would be undetectable, and nobody would be any wiser as to who the hacker was, even if they noticed the change. Moreover, Pete had also written a neat program that acted as a buffer. It was designed to manipulate the records in such a way that no one would know if any changes were made to it or not. Even if, for example, a teacher remembered that they had graded a particular student a C, and now the records were showing a B, they would not find any records that would corroborate what their mind remembered. And in the world of technology, everything was done online with connections to databases. So there would not be any physical records that they would be able to corroborate with it. Even if something slipped and a teacher caught the error, Pete made sure that the hack was untraceable to us. And that is why we hadn't done anything major until now. We were perfecting this method with Pete. He had us all trained to perfection when it came to hacking. We were to remain careful from the start, all the way to the end. Each procedure and step was repeated until it had become a part of our unconscious memory. We did it as part of our second nature, like we drove cars, swam, and rode bicycles. It was part of our second nature, and we were the best coordinated team that had ever hacked. During those days when we were starting out and still learning the ropes, we were obsessed with our hobby of hacking. We would read manuscripts of old and famous hacker activities, study their methods, try to find flaws in them, and improve them so we might be able to utilize them. That is what made us so perfect. We tried to, under Pete's cautious leadership, eliminate any and all errors, flaws, and or missteps that we might make if we were to hack anything. Even though we were all practicing hacking, our plans those days never went beyond taking advantage of our skills for ourselves. All we wanted was to learn hacking, so that we might improve our own grades and pay our fees without ever paying it. That was our only ambition when we started out. However, we were better at it than we imagined, and when Pete saw that Russell needed help with his coursework grades, he decided that it was time for us to test our merit as a team and find out how effectively we performed in a real situation. So, the time and date were decided, and Pete went to Russell and told him what he was about to do. Pete asked him if he had any objections, and I believe Russell's bewildered and excited reply was, "Heck no, thank you in advance." Although even the pumped-up jock had a sharp mind that did work, and he proceeded to ask a little suspiciously, "Why would you do that for me? If you get caught, that would mean you could get kicked out of college." "Well, that is why we don't plan on getting caught. And if we are caught, it would only be because you spilled the beans. Though you should know that if we go down, we take you with us. We have set up a fake transaction showing that you have paid us to hack. Anyone who pays for hacking also gets the same punishments. So, be careful who you trust with this info. As for why we're doing this, well, it's just something that we like to do. So how about it? You want it or not?" Well, this was the mini speech that Pete gave Russell. Russell's response to the question was, "Like I already said, heck yeah, I want you to do it, but I ain't paying you. You're doing this because you want to, right?" "Yes," was the simple reply that Pete gave him. After the conversation where we confirmed that Russell wanted this, we got ready and decided that the following night would be the perfect time as maintenance of the school servers was already scheduled at the time. So it would be easy for us to get in and out without too many disruptions caused by our presence being noticed. That is what we did. An Operation Bonne Note, French for good grades, as we were calling it back then, went off without a hitch. It was poetry in motion for the 5 college students who had just started their lives as career hackers. After we had accomplished that task, we were a bit apprehensive about how it would be perceived. Even though Pete's ingenious little program had made sure that no virtual record would be available that would corroborate with the changed version of the grades, there was no knowing what kind of handwritten records the teachers kept for themselves. Even though it was the age of technological revolution and AI was starting to get incorporated into everything, human nature was still something that was unpredictable. Although our social expert Sash told us we need not worry. He said that humans were essentially comfort-seeking creatures. Hence, they had invented AI. If there was an easier way to do anything, almost everyone would take that route. It was our luck that this has held true for every job that we have done. In fact, Sash was never wrong about human nature. It was uncanny, the way he predicted people's reactions based on their body language. If Pete was the genius programmer and hacker, Sash was the genius who made sure that the most unpredictable part of the operation, the human element, worked smoother than the machines that we were trying to hack. Once again, Sash was right. The teachers went along with what their computers told them. The truth was that there were so many students that it was hard for the teachers to remember their individual grades. Even someone as prominent as Russell, the quarterback of the school football team, was not someone whose grades they needed to remember. So, when Pete ingeniously increased his grade by just a margin, they all accepted that he had been working hard to improve his grades. The whole operation was to be done in parts, although the first run was a little tense. But as every round of improving his grade after each test ran smoothly, the team started to gain more experience and became more confident about their abilities. Hence, the work became even easier. It was compounded by the fact that we loved what we were doing, and the challenges it presented only excited us and made us try harder. After Russell's grades were taken care of, one day he came to our dorm room where we used to hang out and asked Pete if it was okay with him if he brought another player who was in jeopardy with the team coach because of his grades. He wanted Pete to do the same thing with him as he had done with Pete. Since Pete wanted to save the school's football team, he agreed. The reason he had tried to help Russell was because he was the most prominent player and the outcome of the game mostly depended on him. When he came by to ask Pete to improve the result of another team member, Pete saw an opportunity and told Russell that he would do it, but this time, it was going to cost them. It was not a charity organization that we were running. It was our very lives that we were putting in danger for a bunch of college school football players nonetheless. Russell completely agreed with his sentiments, and he also knew the risk of blabbermouths, so he took full responsibility for protecting the secret outside our group. As in, he did not take our responsibility, but the responsibility of other people who came to know our secret. That is how it started. But first, Russell brought in one guy, and then the next. Pretty soon, it was the entire football team that we were looking after. It was our job to hack into the school records and deploy Pete's program, and make sure nobody noticed. However, that was not the end of it, as soon the word began to spread. One member of the football team asked Pete to help his girlfriend. He wanted her to be elected for the arts club, as well as improve her grades. After Pete did that for her, she told one of her girlfriends, and she came to Pete as well, asking for help with her grades. It was soon after this that the whole thing started to really get out of hand. Our popularity kept increasing. It was not long after that time that Pete began drawing up contracts and having people sign a confidentiality agreement before he even accepted that we will do anything on the lines that they were suggesting. And that was the thing about Pete. He was always very cautious. His upbringing was such that he immediately saw the flaws and pitfalls, and he was able to devise contingencies for almost every scenario. I saw something similar in Sibby, and the way he had organized his whole setup. It was almost impeccable. Had we not been trained by his dad, it would have indeed been very hard for us to keep up with him. That was the thing. Both of them came from broken families. In fact, most of us did. And that is what made us experts at overcoming obstacles, especially unforeseen ones. That is where Pete's strength lay. He never cracked under pressure. In fact, he was the calmest version of himself when he was under pressure. That is something I always admired about him. Anyways, soon after we had helped Russell, we found that we were among the most sought-after people on the campus. We were invited to all of the important parties, and people all of a sudden wanted to hang out with us. This was all good news on the surface, but it was something that made us uncomfortable. I mean, apart from Sosh, we were all introverts, and being around people was difficult for us. So even when we were invited to parties, we almost always ended up not going, either because we were too nervous, or we did not know what kind of clothes to wear. However, there was one party we couldn't say no to. It was an invite from Sarah Addington, the most popular girl on campus. She was also Russell's girlfriend, and by now Russell and Pete had come to a mutually beneficial agreement. Pete did the heavy lifting when it came to the electronic stuff, but when it came to enforcing the contract, Russell was in charge. Sosh was the one who always conducted the interviews of the people who came to Pete for hacking into the school's database to help them. He was always able to tell who was lying and who was telling the truth. If he foresaw any problem, he would inform Russell, and he would take it from there. Well, that is how our little setup worked, and everyone was happy with it. We all divided up the profits equally, and well, that little detail did not hurt, as we were lining our pockets. Since it was Sarah who had invited us to the party, we could not refuse. It was the biggest party of the year, and the invite list was basically the who's who of our college, as well as the neighboring institutions. It was the most anticipated event of that semester, and the excitement had gotten to us as well. Sosh had gone through the trouble of buying clothes for all of us, and also tried to give us pointers on how to talk to the people, girls in particular. He even bought a dress for Richard's girlfriend, Tosh. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but she was not the type of girl who was into dresses. In fact, that evening when the rest of us saw Tosh in a dress, all our hearts skipped a few beats. That is how gorgeous she was looking. All of a sudden, it was as if Richard had seen someone new. He started paying a lot more attention to her, where before he had just kept her as his girlfriend because she had become an integral part of the team. Otherwise, he still fooled around behind her back and would talk to other girls as well. Well, that was the reason Tosh grew insecure and clingy with him. To her, it might have seemed that doing so would solve problems, but it did the opposite of that. It drove Richard even further away. However, Tosh did not take the hint and kept trying to cling on to Richard. He was also not bored enough with her to let her go, so he cheated on her behind her back. That was the dynamic of the team when we met that night to go to the party. Tosh was over the moon with the effect her transformation had on the rest of us. She had our undivided attention all the way to the party, especially Richard's. She was not going to let it go to waste and was ordering him around. And that is how we reached the premises of the party, goofing around with each other and admiring Tosh. However, at the entrance, we had the misfortune to run into Douglas. He was Pete's arch enemy. They went to the same high school where Douglas spent 4 years bullying Pete, and now they ended up going to the same college. Pete managed to avoid him most of the time, as they did not have any classes together. But since this was the event of the semester, it was unlikely that the captain of the basketball team would miss it. Pete had hoped they would not come face to face tonight, but that was not to be the case. As soon as Douglas saw Pete, he started to taunt by asking if Pete had lost his way. Because how else was he here with his nerdy gang? When Pete ignored him and chose to enter the party, Douglas blocked his way, told him that it was a party of the elite and that Pete was a nerd who was not welcome. However, Pete kept ignoring him and pushed past Douglas, and the rest of us hurried after him. Douglas was now mad that Pete was not getting scared of him and had entered the party when he had clearly told him that the party was not for him.
Hey, P-Brain, did you not hear me say that the weird nerdo party was across on the other end of campus? Or are you too stupid to know which side of the campus you're on?
Douglas shouted at Pete. We were now inside, and everyone heard Douglas shout at Pete. They all stopped talking to each other and looked at Douglas, who was hot red in the face and had a hold of Pete's shirt collar. That was clearly a sign to everyone that a beating was about to go down, as everyone knew that Pete would have to fight back for it to be classified as a fight. This was going to be an outright beating, as Pete was no match for Douglas. However, it was the party of the college football team who owed their careers to Pete. I think Russell realized this, because from the corner of my eyes I saw him move towards us. He was careful not to get into Douglas's peripheral vision, because he did not want to alert him of imminent danger. As he moved towards them, he sped up and, without saying a word, swung his hand back and struck a hefty punch to Douglas's jaw. I could see him struggling to make the punch moderate. He was not happy that someone was trying to mess with his party's vibe, I think. Although it could have been that he considered Pete a friend by then and did not want to see him get bullied. The punch, although moderated, was powerful enough to knock Douglas out. The rest of the basketball team, who had been gathering around to cheer their captain's act of bullying, were all in an uproar, and they started closing in on Russell and Pete, no doubt to make them pay for what Russell had done to their captain. The rest of the football team were not idle either. They had also been closing in on the scene as well, and when they saw their captain accosted by the basketball team, they rushed forward to even up the playing field. Well, they did more than even up the playing field. They outnumbered the basketball team 2-1, and seeing that they were outnumbered, the basketball team had to back off. So they picked up their still unconscious captain, and amid cheers from all the onlookers, they had to exit the premises in complete humiliation. We enjoyed the party, and our popularity ratings took a huge hike up that day. Our skills became even more in demand, and we were making quite good money. Although it was still not enough for Richard, who had a partial scholarship and whose parents were old, and the sole breadwinner of the family was his elder sister Julia. Since she was taking care of the whole family, Julia was always strapped for cash. Richard was always having to talk with the financial advisors on campus to extend his payment due dates or something related to fee payments. However, it was still something that helped him a little. He was always looking for other ways to earn money, and even though he was in need of it, he always did come out seeming a little greedy. As I was saying, even though that evening was a good one for us, Pete's list of enemies grew to include Douglas as well. Up until now, he had just been Pete's bully, but after the incident at the football party, he had been humiliated in front of almost the whole campus. Those who were not there got to know of the incident the next day, and videos were up for everyone to see. Douglas now hated Pete with a vengeance. He was looking for payback, and all of us knew it. We knew that from now on, Pete had to be even more careful. Pete was still trying to avoid Sebastian, the hedge fund millionaire, and with all the favors that the Chinese had done for him, he was sure that they were going to collect on them very soon. They would call on him to help with something that was sure to be difficult and high risk. If it weren't, they were accomplished enough to not need Pete for anything. The biggest hack the Chinese had helped him with at the time had been the gas station hack for Niraj's dad. Pete made a program for him that would manipulate the gas pump prices and the amount of gas a customer actually got. Pete taught him to install the software on 7 gas pumps, and he was responsible for the other 250 pumps nationwide. The whole thing made Niraj's dad a handsome profit, and he paid us an amount of $26,000 for our services. Well, since the Chinese helped him a lot in making the program, Pete offered to pay them the amount of $15,000, but they declined by saying that they had a bigger operation in mind, and this would take them in the millions. They said that Pete would have to help them whenever they called on him. He owed them that. So Pete gave Richard most of it, because he was behind on his tuition. Please pick up the second book, Rise of the CEOs and We Are Back, from the Dark Cumulus series at your nearest bookstore or on Amazon.com.